My name is Crystal Petrie, and welcome to my channel, the Crystal Petrie Consulting Network. Today we're going to talk about two very important words. Two words that you hear everywhere. You hear them on TV. You hear them on the radio. You hear them on podcasts. You see them all over social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. They are literally everywhere. And you know what? They should be everywhere, because these two words affect everything about you and everything about me. If you have not guessed it by now, the two words that I'm talking about are diversity and inclusion. You hear those words everywhere. And you should, because they are two very, very important words. But normally when you hear those words, like 9 times out of 10, you hear them interchangeably, meaning people are using those words as if they mean the same thing. And that is just not correct. Those two words are two completely different words. And that's one of the things I want you to take away from this video. The difference between diversity and the difference between inclusion. The second thing I want you to take away from this video today is what happens when you assume. Yes. So let's jump right into it. Diversity and inclusion. When you hear those words and you hear them everywhere, and it should be heard everywhere, because diversity and inclusion is very important to everyone, not just people of color, but for everyone. So we should hear them all the time. It should be at the forethought of everyone. Whether you're talking, reading, listening, whatever you're doing, you should always be thinking about diversity, and you should always be thinking about inclusion. So, the definition for diversity is the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders and sexual orientations. So that is the definition of diversity. Now, the definition of inclusion. The practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. Members of minority groups, for example, African Americans, Hispanic, Asian, and those who have physical or mental disabilities. And that last sentence in the definition of inclusion is very important, because you cannot be truly inclusive if you are not involving and inviting people with physical disabilities and with mental disabilities. They are included in that definition of inclusiveness. And a lot of times people forget about special needs people, and they forget about people with mental disabilities, but they have to be, and they must be included in this conversation. Now, if you listen closely, did you hear what the similarity is between those two words? Now, I just gave you what the differences are between diversity and inclusion. But did you catch the similarity in those definitions? If you didn't, the similarity between diversity and inclusion is one simple word. That word is practice. I will say it again for the people in the back. Practice is the similarity between diversity and inclusion. And the reason that that word is so important, because if we're honest with ourselves, we will never be 100% sold on diversity. We will never be 100% sold on inclusion. So we have to practice it every single day. We have to practice diversity every day. We have to practice inclusion every day. It has to become habitual in our lives with everything that we do. When we go to school, we need to practice diversity and inclusion. When we go to work, we need to practice diversity and inclusion. When we go to the grocery store or the mall, we need to practice diversity and inclusion. Even online, we do a lot of online shopping. We're online a lot these days. Even online, we need to practice diversity and inclusion until it becomes a habit for us, until it becomes like breathing for us, until it becomes like eating for us. It has to be habitual to the point that we don't even notice when we are doing it. So those definitions were from dictionary.com for diversity and inclusion. But I'm going to give you a layman's man definition of diversity and inclusion. And I heard this from a wonderful, beautiful brown-skinned woman named Kamari. She gave this definition and it was just like an aha moment for me. I was like, yes, that's a perfect definition of those two words, and it gives you a great visual of those two words as well. So, diversity, layman's man definition. Diversity is being asked to the party, asked to the prom, asked to lunch or to dinner. That is diversity. You are asking other people who do not look like you to come and work with you, to come and sit with you, to sit at the table with you, to have thoughts and ideas with you. You are inviting them to the party. That is diversity. Now, inclusion. The layman's man definition of inclusion: asking them to dance when they get to the party. So, you ask them to the party, you ask them to the prom, and when they get there, you make them feel included. You ask, do you want to dance? Do you want something to drink? Do you want something to eat? You introduce them to other people. You introduce them to your friends. You introduce them to your family members. You make them feel included when they get to the party. So it's not enough to just invite someone to the party and then leave them and ghost them at the party. You have to make them feel included once they get there. And we hear the phrase invited to the table, have a seat at the table. And yes, that's very important. People of color, people with mental disabilities, people with special needs want to be invited to the table. But when we get to the table, we want to be included while we're there. Meaning, ask us our thoughts, ask us our opinions, ask us for our knowledge, ask us for our wisdom. And when we give it to you, you actually take it and you consider it. And you accept some of it. Invite us to the party. Invite people of color to the party. That's the diversity piece. And when we get to the party, make us feel included when we are there. That's the inclusion piece. Ask us to dance when we get to the party. Don't just leave us there. Don't just ghost us. Make us feel included. Now, my ideology or assumption when it comes to diversity in spaces such as volunteerism, diversity in spaces such as service, is that most people, 9 out of 10 maybe, I'm not going to say 10 out of 10, but I will say 9 out of 10, don't see anything wrong with the lack of diversity or inclusion when it comes to volunteering. They don't see anything wrong with the lack of diversity or inclusion when it comes to service. They are just happy that somebody is out there volunteering. They are just happy that someone is out there giving of their time for free. And we are all happy about that. We all love volunteers. We all should be volunteering. We all should be trying to make the place that we live a better place. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I want to draw your attention to is the lack of diversity and the lack of inclusion when it comes to volunteering and when it comes to service. There are not a lot of people of color. There are not a lot of people with mental health issues or special needs when it comes to volunteering. And this is something that has to be at the forefront of our conversations and our thoughts. Lawrence Newman says, the vast majority of Americans see it as being fixed, inflexible, and unquestioned. And he's talking about the lack of diversity and inclusion when it comes to volunteering and when it comes to service. It's fixed. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't see a problem with it. You don't see a problem with it. Therefore, we're not going to do anything about it. We're just going to continue to let volunteers volunteer. We're going to continue to let people that's in service continue to serve. There's nothing wrong with it not being diverse. I don't see a problem with that. But there lies the problem. That's the problem, that we do not see a problem with the lack of diversity and the lack of inclusion when it comes to volunteering. And as I was working on this video and writing out my content, it occurred to me that the first objective must be to get the majority of Americans to see that there is a clear problem when not just volunteers, but any group of people is primarily one ethnicity. Then once that is identified and once people see that this is a problem, then and only then can we work on strategic change to fix it. So the vast majority of people have to first come together and see that there's a problem when there's just one ethnicity volunteering. So now that I've given you the definition of diversity and the definition of inclusion and given you the differences of that, I want to leave you with a story. And this story I like to call the assumption of sewing. So before COVID, when we were allowed to go outside and we were allowed to go to birthday parties, I was at a birthday party for a woman who was turning 85 years old. I had on a long, flowy, beautiful white skirt. There was a small tear in the skirt. I knew it was there. I put the skirt on anyway, and I just figured that no one would notice it. But the birthday girl, who was turning 85 years old, noticed the tear. And she said, "Crystal, do you know you have a tear in your skirt?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I do know that I have a tear in my skirt." So she said, "When you get home, you need to sew that tear up. That's a beautiful skirt. All you have to do is sew it and it'll be just like new. Make sure you sew your skirt up when you get home." So I laughed and I laughed. And she said, "What's so funny?" I said, "I don't know how to sew." And she was blown away. She was blown away that I did not know how to sew. She just assumed that I knew how to sew. And the fact that she assumed that I knew how to sew made me feel good. It made me happy that she would assume something good about me. So you know what I did when I went home? I Googled how to sew a tear. And I YouTubed it. And I learned how to sew a tear. So your girl, your favorite consultant here, now knows how to sew a tear. If it's in a shirt, if it's in a skirt, if it's in some shorts, I can sew it. The moral of that story is, whatever you assume about someone is the truth. She assumed that I can sew. And because she assumed that, it made me want to go and learn how to sew. So if you assume that someone wants to volunteer, it's going to make them want to go and volunteer. If you assume that someone does not want to volunteer, it's going to make them not want to volunteer. If you assume that someone does not want to perform a service project, it's going to make them not want to perform that service project. So always assume the best in people. Always assume the best in people of color. Always assume the best in people with special needs. Always assume the best with people with mental health issues, and they will prove you right. Thank you for watching my show today. Stay social with me by liking this video, subscribing to my channel, and commenting down below. Bye, everyone.